Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Before we start, I have a few logistical items to cover. A short disclaimer, the information presented here is to inform the board. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of the board or any board member. We are recording this presentation and we will post it to our website at ssab.gov in case you miss anything or want to share it with others. Throughout the day, please submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom or email us at events@ssab.gov. You can also tweet us at our handle at @ssabgov. Lastly, if you have any feedback, we welcome it. Please email events@ssab.gov. And with that, hand it over to you, Bob.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Joondeph, and I'm the chair of the Social Security Advisory Board. And I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us on behalf of myself and other board members, Kim Hildred, Jagadish Gokhale, and Nancy Altman. I'll be serving as moderator for today's session, and Conway Riders, who's the lead policy analyst at SSAB, will be coordinating our Q&A session. This afternoon, the board is hosting its fourth Systems Speakers Series event on customer experience as a driver for modernizing information technology, or IT. This session will focus on how the Department of Veterans Affairs is improving its services to veterans, their families, and caregivers. Today, we are very fortunate to have Barbara Morton with us. Barbara is the Deputy Chief Experience Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And Barbara was an agency recipient for the Gears for Government Award, which was awarded in 2019, and the Service to the Citizen Award, which is also awarded in 2019 for transforming the VA capability to provide veterans with an excellent customer experience. We will provide a link to Barbara's full bio in the chat box, and it's also available on our website. So today, Barbara will be addressing four topics. The first is institutionalizing customer experience. Second is key customer experience concepts, then measuring customer experience. And finally, customer experience in IT, or information technology modernization. After each topic presentation, we will open it up for board members to ask questions about those topics and then open it up for public comment and questions. The public may submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function. So Barbara, before we launch out into the first question, I'd like to ask you what brought you onto this path of customer experience and becoming its champion?
Well, I appreciate you all, first of all, having me here. It's a real pleasure to be able to be speaking about my experience in the VA journey, the CX journey, and share that with all of you. So very excited for the conversation. And I do love that question, Bob, because it's very unintuitive. So I am a lawyer by trade, and people typically ask me, how the heck did you jump from being an attorney to being in the middle of customer experience in government? So if I may indulge myself in a story for the benefit of sharing kind of how I made that jump. So it really all started with a phone call from a veteran. And this was when I was at a prior group in VA called the Board of Veterans Appeals. So that's where I started my work at VA about 15 years ago as an attorney. And in one of my jobs there, one day I received a phone call from a veteran, which was very unusual because I wasn't necessarily in a type of role where you would get a direct phone call from a customer. And I was very happy to take it, of course. And it was he was a World War II veteran. And I could tell he was very sort of anxious and sort of lost in the appeals process. It's a very complex process, and certainly was not having a great experience in the process. And so I took his name, I took his number, and I started sort of researching what was going on with his appeal. And it turns out that we, VA, had to sort of rebuild key records, key files in that appeal. And at the time, it was a paper-based appeal. So we had to go track down some records, make photocopies, and include them in the file. And this took a number of weeks. And at the end of every week, I would call this veteran, reach out to him, just give him, sort of an update, a status update, because I knew he was, incredibly anxious about the whole process. And so by the time we were able to sort of get his appeal back on track, I was super excited to deliver the great news to him. And it was at that time that he gave me such an incredibly impactful compliment. He said, "Thank you, Barbara. I trust you because I knew you would take care of me." And that was just something at that moment. I knew how it made me feel that I was able to actually A, help this veteran, and B, earn their trust when he had had sort of a not so great experience being lost in this process. And so a few years later, when I was asked to join the Veterans Experience Office, which at the time, back in 2016, it was a new concept, it was a new idea. People thought I was a little bonkers for jumping to it, but I couldn't resist, because my goal and my drive is to replicate that experience that I had been able to create for this veteran across the entire system, with every veteran, every family member, every caregiver, every survivor. And that's really how I ended up bridging from my legal background into the Veterans Experience Office.
Well, speaking also as a attorney that's wandered, I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So Conway, is it time for you to jump in with the first question?
Well, we don't have any questions yet, but we thought that we could maybe give Barbara a chance to start speaking, go through the first part. And as a reminder, you can submit your questions via the Q&A box. If you have comments, we'll publish those as well. But we're really looking forward to
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'm wondering, Conway, do you have slides that the slides that I could share, or Omar?
Yes. Yeah, okay? I think Omar can pull those up right now.
Great, thank you. And I would love to sort of take you through, the slides that I have put together, just to kind of level set, give everyone an overview, and really dive a little bit deeper into the VA journey, and then certainly hit on those specific topic areas as well that Bob mentioned. But I think kind of being able to tell where we've been, looking backwards in order to look forward, I think could be hopefully useful for this group, and certainly generate some great discussion, and also some questions as well. And as I go through, again, please, I'll pause at certain moments, and please feel free to jump in and ask any questions along the way as well. So very excited to jump into that. I usually start, and as we're waiting for Omar to put the slides up, I usually do start kind of talking about how personal this experience has been for me, and how important bringing this capability to VA, but frankly to government at large, is how important it is to me. I think about public service, and I chose public service. I knew that was sort of my beacon, my North Star. And as a public servant, I feel like we owe it to each other as members of the public, and to our brothers and sisters across the United States and beyond, to deliver exceptional experiences, not treat everybody as a transaction. Certainly there's transactional work that needs to get done, but really make sure experience can enter how we think, how we do our business, and how we operate, to sort of elevate experience as a co-equal measure of how we perform in our service delivery. So if we can go, Omar, to the next slide. The next slide really showcases, one more slide. So this is so slide 3. And I know that you all have access to this. There are some graphics that may not be visible, because it's 508 compliant, but hopefully this tells a good story. So the CX journey in VA has had a number of different phases. And it started what I perceive to be a long time ago. So back in 2011, under General Rick Shinseki, he knew that VA has an incredible mission, but wanted to sort of anchor us in sort of a unified set of core values and characteristics. So we kind of look at that time frame 10 years ago and think about how that level set the culture and the mindset that we wanted to think about that was unifying us as a whole. That was sort of codified in our regulations in 2012. And so when you read that regulation, you'll sort of see references to trust and sort of hints of experience in there, although it was not explicitly called out. But that is where I kind of see the seeds had started to be planted. You fast forward to 2014, and when we talk about the cookbook later on, you'll see kind of how all this sort of weaves together. 2014 was a huge catalyst for us. That was the Phoenix VA Medical Center wait time crisis, a very difficult time, of course, first and foremost for veterans, but also for VA and staff. And that was really a wake-up call, I think, for us, the collective us, the department, to really think about what are we missing in terms of giving those great experiences? Why did we not detect that as being an issue on the ground in Phoenix? And so fast forward to 2015, you've got a new secretary who comes in, Secretary Bob McDonald, and he is an industry professional, right? Who knew the value of customer experience in an industry perspective. And what he saw as a symptom of what happened in Phoenix was the fact that we didn't have a mechanism or capability to bubble up experience insights to give us those sort of previews of, hey, something is going on over there and what's around the corner? How do we see something before it becomes a crisis? So in his vision, he established VA's first ever Veterans Experience Office. And frankly, it was one of government's first ever as well. I think GSA had stood up a customer experience office probably around the same time, but we were one of the first. And it was an incredible moment for us to really kind of put a stake in the ground at the highest levels of leadership with the weight of the Secretary's office saying that experience matters and this is how we're going to do business. Also in 2015, this was another groundbreaking moment where we, VA, performed some human-centered design research and created our first ever Veterans Journey Map. Again, groundbreaking because it talked about and showed how VA fits into a veteran's life cycle rather than a veteran having to figure out which org chart they need to go to get their benefits. It was a huge sort of transformation in terms of mindset and thinking shift. People originally were sort of like, that's pretty, but what do you do with it? And it was really kind of up to us to help translate what those insights mean into concrete action and change of how we do some business. 2016 is another important year. So we've stood up the office, we've done the first ever journey map. We're really trying to figure out, what do we want to sort of benchmark and sort of measure our performance on in this space. Trust has been our North Star. And frankly, again, as a public servant in public service, trust, I think, is globally our collective North Star in any event, specifically so for VA, because oftentimes we are supporting vulnerable populations and veterans in their families in need. So that first benchmark measure of trust, as you can see, the score was 55%. Either veterans agree or strongly agree with the statement that I trust VA to fulfill its commitment to veterans. Now, 55%, when I was in grade school, was probably not a great score. It's not something that you'd want to bring home to your mom or your dad. So we knew that we had a huge mountain to climb in the best of ways, though, to keep that focus, keep that attention on experience, and really move the needle on trust by investing in and having leadership support in experience as a core business discipline. So how did we do that? How did we start getting there? 2017 was an incredibly pivotal year for us. And one of the things that we knew that we wanted to do was we wanted to prove the concept of the value of experience as a core business discipline, of measuring experience, of applying human-centered design, rolling out suites of tools across the system and seeing improvements in experience. And so we partnered very early on with the Veterans Health Administration. They were early adopters of experience with us. And they said, let's go on this journey together. So in 2017, we started developing our patient experience program. Typically, we start with a journey map. So that's where we started there, with an outpatient journey map using human-centered design. Understanding from a veteran's perspective, the moments that matter most to them, the bright spots, the pain points in that interaction with VA in the healthcare space. And we use those human-centered design insights to prototype and develop and roll out tangible suites of tools, again, across the system, which I'll talk about in a little bit, to empower employees to deliver better experiences, right? So we really want to be able to bridge those insights into something concrete and tangible to spread across the system. Some other key things that happened in 2018, we had a new secretary come in, Secretary Robert Wilkie, who designated experience as his prime directive. Again, talking about the importance of leadership support, that was huge for us in 2018. We were also designated as lead agency partner for the President's management agenda, cross-agency priority goal of improving federal services, customer experience with federal services. That was very pivotal for us as well, because we knew that that was going to elevate the visibility and the interest and the attention to experience to keep it a central focus. 2019, so as a lawyer by trade, you can see why 2019 was a significant time as well, and one of our best practices. When we looked at our core values that were codified in 2012, we thought to ourselves, hey, aren't part of VA's core values and characteristics customer experience principles as well? Shouldn't that be, again, a language that we all speak, that we embed in how we think and do and deliver? And the answer, of course, was yes. So we amended in 2019 our regulations to include explicitly customer experience principles of trust, ease, effectiveness, and emotion, which I'll speak about a little bit more. That to me also was very transformational, because it means that everybody is on the same page and the same sheet of music, and we drive our VA-wide trainings around these concepts. So it's really embedding deeply, deeply in the organization and in the culture as well. Going forward, 2020, 2021, we've now started to sort of pivot our model to focus also on employee experience. So applying the same framework, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, from the customer experience side, using human-centered design insights and design and prototyping testing, we're applying that same framework to the employee experience. And so we did our first ever VA-wide employee experience journey map, which is a corollary, in fact, to the veterans experience journey map that we had concluded in 2015. So fast forward to 2021, we are fortunate to have another secretary whose top priority is experience, which is fantastic. Secretary McDonough has embraced VEO and all the capabilities that we can offer, which is incredible. And our trust score today stands at 79%, which is an increase beyond the 55% of about 24%. So when you kind of devote time, energy, resources to experience, you can actually move the needle on trust. Next slide. And I can pause there for any particular questions on the journey, and I'll go deeper into each of these concepts as well.
Oh, proceed.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so vision and mission. So VEO, we are a shared service, which means that we support the entire department: health, benefits, memorial services, and other organizations like IT, for example. And the framework that we have consists of 4 core capabilities, which I'll go into in a few minutes. Customer experience data being one, tangible tools that I talked about, enabling technology, which I know is of interest to this group, and finally, sort of engagement, boots on the ground, excuse me, engagement. We are sort of an insights engine, if you will. Excuse me. So if the secretary wants to know what's going on the ground in terms of experience, we're able to provide that information, that data to him. Next slide, please. So typically when I'm trying to describe our office, what I like to do if I'm in person is I like to ask people to take out a pencil and a piece of paper. And that's when people get usually pretty nervous, because I think an art test is coming. So I usually say, hey, if you're thinking about representing VA and VA capabilities and you had to sketch it out on a piece of paper, what would that look like? Typically what comes back is a simple org chart, right? You've got a secretary, you've got health, you've got benefits, you've got memorial services. Nothing wrong with that, but that's very much VA from a VA perspective. If you go to the next slide, and thanks Omar for driving. The next slide, excuse me, is what veterans see us as. They see us as fitting into different moments that matter to them in their life cycle. So instead of us trying to have a burden shifted to veterans so they have to figure out our org structure, it should be incumbent upon us to figure out how we best fit into their lives according to their life journey. So again, it's a very different way of thinking, turning ourselves inside out and stepping into the shoes of our customers to meet them where they are and help them connect with us in a way that makes sense to them. Next slide. So I'll dive into, perfect. So talked about customer experience principles at the opening, right? And really grounding in terms of customer experience, customer service. What is the key difference between those things? Again, this goes back to our regulations that are codified. We define experience in a very kind of simple simple way for people to understand. So it's not complex and people don't wonder, are we on the same page when we talk about experience? We use a model that is really focused on 4 main dimensions of how we measure our performance and experience. The first is ease. Was it easy for a veteran to get what they needed? The second, was it effective? Did they actually get what they needed? The third and most important in terms of understanding the difference between experience and customer service is emotion. It's that emotional connectivity. So we do not treat each other and veterans as a transaction, even though there are transactions we have to do, excuse me. We really treat them in terms of being, excuse me, empathetic and emotional and connected humans. Apologize, guys, got a little frog in my throat. These three elements of ease, effectiveness, and emotion are all drivers to our North Star, which I mentioned is trust. And so as I stated before, this is now codified. It is the law, it's in our regulations, and it really is our North Star, putting that stake in the ground of how important experience actually is. And I would say, just in terms of the question, sometimes people ask, well, customer service, customer experience. Again, the experience part is really building a lifelong and multi sort of touch point connection across multiple channels, whether it's in person, whether it's online, whether it's by the phone. Really wanting to sort of help veterans understand that we are here for them, we care for them, expressing empathy and having that emotional connection. And that really is the difference between customer experience and customer service. Next slide. So this is something that I always love sharing in terms of how exciting it is to be in customer experience in government today. There are so many drivers, so many influences, both within VA as an agency, but also externally. I mean, this is literally sort of a huge movement that is just burgeoning and getting stronger and stronger, which makes me super happy. So as you can see here, again, I talked about some of the internal drivers of customer experience being our CFR. We also have a VA directive, first ever CX directive, which again kind of codifies what the CFR talks about, but really drills down into specific roles and responsibilities. So that is, again, hardwired in our organization, and it is not administration specific. So this is a best practice that we recommend. If you want to hardwire something in your organization, we didn't want it to be Secretary McDonald or Secretary Wilkie or Secretary McDonough specific. We wanted it to cross and transcend any administration, and that's what the CFR and the CX directive does for us. I mentioned the White House initiatives like the President's Management Agenda. There are executive orders, as you know, that have come out in the past and also recently, which directly tie into experience. So Executive Order 13985 on equity and underserved populations. We saw that immediately as a direct connection to experience. Why? Because the best way to understand a certain cohort's experience is through human-centered design and talking to them. Operational metrics may kind of signal something for you if you talk about number of benefits awarded or number of hearings scheduled, but it's only going to take you so far. Only with human-centered design, in my opinion, can you really get to the very deep understanding of what will or will not work for a certain population. And that's the connection, the strong connection that I see with experience in this particular executive order. We also, VA, have proudly had an agency priority goal that is experience related since 2015. So as you may know, agency priority goals are publicly reported 2-year cycles and really kind of keep us accountable for certain priority areas. And so we had our first trust experience measure that was in the first cycle in 2015. Today, we are considering and hoping for approval in terms of an agency priority goal that would support the equity EO regarding underserved populations and trust of those populations. So again, another lever for us to utilize to keep experience front and center and to show that it actually is equally as valuable as other initiatives and other areas of our business. The VA strategic plan, which I'll just touch on briefly. Every agency, as you know, has a strategic plan, typically a 5 to 7 year plan. The interesting part about the strategic plan in VA is we have really started to embed not only the Veterans Journey Map, but also reference to veterans experience throughout all VA strategic plan. You will start to see veterans experience appear in strategic plan refreshes dating back to 2015, 2016, and it's now even more prominent. So just from that historical lens, it's been fascinating to see how we've been able to sort of weave it in over the years, and it's gotten more amplified year over year, which is amazing. The final thing I'll mention on this slide particularly, so legislation, there have been a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced over the years. The most recent one is called the Trust in Public Service Act, the TIPS Act, which essentially creates a federal government-wide customer experience framework, which is incredible. So it really sort of hits a lot of the notes in terms of what VA and other agencies have been doing in this space for the last few years. And that is sort of pending on the Hill, and looking forward to observing that and seeing where that goes. But I think what it signals is there is sort of a building consensus about experience being a really important measure of performance and a really important methodology of how we do business in government. Next slide. All right, so I'll dive a little bit deeper into our VA CX strategy. And as I mentioned about the directive that essentially is drawn from the CFR, the strategy has three main components. And this is something that, again, it's a way that we have done it at VA. It's something that other organizations certainly could do as well. But we wanted to sort of keep it high level in three main areas that we think are really non-negotiable in terms of how you drive experience throughout an organization. The first pillar, and I'll spend more time going into sort of these particular areas, is really defining what are the core capabilities, the what you do in customer experience in an agency, and the framework, the how you do it, how do you operationalize it, how do you execute it. The second pillar is really around governance. So you can have some great capabilities in a framework, but if you don't have a way to hardwire customer experience evidence measures into decision-making, it may just sort of be a personality-driven, trend, if you will, and we don't want that. So you want to hardwire it throughout governance. The third piece of this, and these all work sort of in tandem together, is about accountability. So if we don't keep ourselves on the hook for experience, right, again, it's sort of maybe a flavor of the month that people opt in or opt out of. We definitely do not want that. And so some particular areas of accountability, I just mentioned the agency priority goal. That's a very visible way to keep ourselves on the hook for experience. We also have in every senior executive at VA performance plan, I think there are like 400 to 500 senior executives. We all have experience measures of performance for our end of year performance. So again, really trying to bake it in solidly at the organizational and also at the individual level. Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay, so back in the day, when I first joined VEO in 2016, the original model was really about building relationships, rebuilding trust, which makes perfect sense. But it was really kind of more focused on outreach initially. And one of the things that we realized when I joined and sort of in the subsequent year or so is that we really wanted to make sure that we could bring something of new and different value to the organization rather than just one particular source, which would have been outreach. And so we kind of landed on what we call four core capabilities, which I mentioned at the outset. And we'll go through each one of these just on this slide. So the first core capability that we bring to the department that we thought was super important is customer experience data. And when we talk about data, we talk about it in two dimensions. One, of course, is the best practice of human-centered design, which to me is really the foundation of all experience and sort of the ability to scale and implement experience-related initiatives across an agency. And the second is real-time customer experience surveys. So in my prior life, when I was an attorney, we did have customer experience surveys, and this is years ago, but they were paper-based and they were very lagging, right? So we wouldn't get results for like 8 months later. That is just not the world we live in today. We need to have that data as near real time as possible to be able to make it right for veterans and their families. So having robust human-centered design and real-time survey and data analytics capabilities was absolutely critical up front, and that's something we've built over the last number of years. The second core capability, and I mentioned this a little bit at the outset, is tangible tools. So bridging those insights and those pieces of data, not just having it be shelfware and in a nice report, but actually bridging those insights and transforming them, translating them into concrete tools for employees to empower them to deliver better experiences. So as an example, we have a training that we've delivered to over 140,000 VA employees that teaches the principles of experience. Remember, the ease, effectiveness, emotion, and trust. So we all know what we're talking about. We all know what we're aiming for. We also have a number of artifacts that we've created, co-designed with veterans using the Veterans Journey Map to help veterans understand how to navigate VA. Like probably SSA and other agencies, our customers find it very difficult to navigate a huge organization. So we wanted to do a very simple way of presenting how VA fits into their lives. Their leadership customer experience practices that we've helped institute and scale, consultations that we do, deep dives on data, a number of different suites of tools, again, with the aim of translating those customer experience insights into action to empower employees to deliver better experiences with measurable results. The third core capability, and this is a little bit of a unique one, is technology. So our office is an enterprise-wide office, meaning we kind of look horizontally across the health, memorial, and benefit spaces, and we sponsor this kind of cross-cutting modernization portfolio. So for example, contact center modernization, VA has hundreds of contact centers, as you can imagine. How do we sort of bring together certain scripts about experience, training about experience? How do we integrate the back-end data so there can be a unified experience? We are the sponsors of those sort of cross-cutting enterprise-wide portfolios. Same thing with digital modernization as well. VA.gov, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, is our front door digitally. How do we make sure that that is a seamless integrated experience for veterans so they don't have to navigate hundreds of different websites and sort of get lost in the process? So that's a huge part of how we support and enable the experience as well. The final core capability really is about that original vision of engagement and outreach. We have a number of outreach platforms and partnerships, strategic partnerships. So we have events, we have a newsletter that we send out to 12 million veterans and supporters every year, really just making sure we can keep them connected and informed with what we do at VEO, but also VA at large. I want to pause there to see if there are any thoughts or questions with respect to any of the principles or core capabilities that we've talked about so far.
Well, let's first of all open that question to board members.
Yes, please.
We'll start there, and then we'll ask if people who are attending have questions through our Q&A
Perfect.
function. So, board members, do we have any questions at this point?
It's Kim. Barbara, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
I wanted to. I'm trying to get my arms around a lot of this is obviously a little bit foreign, so I'm trying to get my arms around it. But in thinking about, I always think about, often the public always, they want to understand, they want to learn, and they also, sometimes they always want more, depending upon, what they're looking for. And yet, every federal agency has limited resources, right?
Yes,
can't provide the moon. So maybe you could just briefly explain to me, how do you match, kind of expectations with funding, or how do you use the process to identify better cost efficiencies, or do you follow me? I'm just trying to. Want the moon and the stars, you can't give it to them. How do you figure that out? How does that work itself through the system?
Yeah, so I think you hit on a really key tension, and tension to me is not a bad word. I think it's an important way that we all have to navigate, because you're absolutely right. I mean, budgets, that's real. I mean, constraints and sort of requirements from those, our siblings on the Hill. I mean, they want to see certain performance measures. I mean, that's all absolutely real. And so the question is, how do you fold in something like experience without sort of sacrificing what is required in other forums? How do you make it sort of this, again, co-equal measure of performance? I think for us at VA, I mean, I always see sort of a catalyst as an opportunity. I do think Phoenix for us was certainly a catalyst. It was a very uncomfortable one, but I think that gave us, meaning the leadership at the time, really kind of a blank slate to kind of redesign and sort of make the argument for resource allocation to something like experience. So we may have sort of been a little bit of in an exception of an experience that way. because we were able to sort of, get some general consensus at the outset that, hey, we really need to get this right. We need to get this straight. On the other side of it, though, what I'll say is, I think that the power of experience for me, to your point, Kim, is helping us make business decisions about allocation of dollars and directing those dollars in the right way. Give you a quick example. VA.gov, I mentioned that is our VA's digital front door. If you had looked at VA.gov as a website about 3 to 4 years ago, you would have seen a website very much designed from the inside out, kind of like an org chart, right? And that makes sense in terms of that's how we think of ourselves, right? We knew, however, that veterans had a very difficult time navigating that website and understanding what was the front door. So we applied human-centered design. We went to talk to veterans and we said, okay, if you want to transact with VA digitally, which website do you think of? Do you think of vets.gov, va.gov, My Healthy Vet, eBenefits? I mean, the whole host of properties. Veterans came back and they said, we think of va.gov. That's the place that we want to transact with the department. That was a key insight because that enabled leadership at the time at the secretary level to make a business and a resource decision to say, okay, we are going to consolidate under the banner of va.gov. We're not going to continue to invest and build out in other places. This is going to be the front door. And so we redesigned it also with veterans. And so the website you see today looks and feels vastly different because it's been redesigned with veterans using human-centered design. And customer satisfaction, veteran satisfaction with the website has increased by 20% since we relaunched in 2018. So this is where the evidence-based starts to come in, right? We all know like evidence-based policymaking. This is sort of a lever that we can utilize to say, okay, evidence as a lawyer is something that tends to prove or disprove something. Did I get that right, Bob? I think I got that right, that definition from first year.
Very good.
Right. And experience, though, is a really important piece of evidence to say, you know what? This is actually going to have a better impact on our customers. And so it's worth, the investment, the resource investment in this direction before we continue to build something that actually isn't working for the customer and ultimately will cause more and more problems down the road. So that's, it's really about kind of being able to sort of tie the business case, I think, to your point, Kim, back to resource allocation. And if you have a catalyst, sometimes that's a way where people can think a little bit differently. I think that's what happened for us in VA back in 2014, 2015.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Other board.
Yeah, I have a question, Barbara.
Nancy, please.
Nancy Altman. Thank you so much. This is extremely helpful. My sense is that the early days of the Social Security Administration, the administrators really did have sort of intuitively this sense about serving the public and the customer experience. And one of the ways my understanding is that they really got the whole organization moving in this direction was through training. Everyone who was hired was trained not just in their own job, but in the mission of the agency, and they were serving and how what they did was important for whatever to make it work for everyone. And of course, with the VA, it's even more than that. You've got a core of veterans that we're all grateful to. What do you see as the role of training so that it's not just another checkoff, but it's really integrated into the organization?
Oh my gosh, Nancy, I love that question. And I think training, you're right. How do you make it so it's not a check in the box and like scroll, click, click, click through it, right? So training, this goes back to our core values, characteristics, and now customer experience principles, which of course are now codified in our regulations. That has sort of been the authority, if you will, the engine for us to revamp training at a VA-wide level. So we have a signature training that we built. It's called Own the Moment. And it essentially teaches, again, the emotional connection and really kind of through a storytelling model is really how we've done it. So it's not sort of death by PowerPoint. Again, I love PowerPoint. I hope that you all don't feel that way about this presentation, but it's really about storytelling and actually really kind of bringing in personal stories from employees and talking about what the core values of integrity, commitment, advocacy, respect, and excellence, trust means to them. And then sort of giving them sort of very simple, tangible tools about, simple low-tech things like look someone in the eye when you're passing them in the hallway. If you see a veteran that looks kind of lost in a facility, swing by and say, hey, what can I help you with, right? Just very low-tech, but very human connectivity based tools to be able to kind of apply on the spot. And I think that's kind of where we are in a lot of ways in the Twitter universe that we're in, right? You want on the spot, quick and easy things to actually implement that may not take a lot of technology or anything else. They just take an intention and awareness and an orientation to focus our energy in that emotional and connected way. So we have, as I mentioned, so we have an Own the Moment training workshop. It's like a 3-day workshop that we've rolled out across, again, like for 140,000 employees. But we also have an annual VA core values training that is required. It's one of those mandatory trainings, right? But what we did is we revamped it because we didn't want it to be exactly what you said, Nancy, as a check the box. Okay, I know the core values, I got it. Like, let's just move on to the next thing. We made it into a 10-minute module. It's like a micro module. We open it with a story about an employee's experience in sort of building trust. We followed up with a 3 to 5 minute module in terms of, hey, here's how you can actually practice I care behaviors that are consistent with our values, meaning eye contact, meaning stopping and helping someone get to where they need to be. And then third, we have a partnership that created a video of, and they were actors, but the video was basically told from the veteran's perspective. So you would hear what was going on in the veteran's head and sort of the dialogue internally that the veteran was having when they were interacting at different points in a VA medical facility. And sort of that was so powerful because it put us in the shoes of veterans. So it's just, again, really kind of turning upside down our traditional ways of thinking. And we've gotten such incredible feedback from that because, again, it's short and sweet, it's practical, and it's emotional. I mean, people emailed me and said, I burst into tears. I mean, and that makes me happy because it means we're connecting people and grounding ourselves back into that very human core mission of ours. But training is the key. I think it's a starting point. It's never an ending point, but it has to be a continual strategy, and a refresh of that training to keep it live for everybody, I think is really, really important as well. So great question.
Excellent. Well, wonderful answer. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks, Nancy.
Jagadish, anything?
I'm okay for now. Thank you. I'll
come
back later.
Great. I have follow-up on that earlier question from Nancy's question, Barbara. I think about employee skill sets and that this ability to interrelate with others is going to vary quite a bit among people. So how do you take that into account?
So interesting. So I think there are a couple sort of ways that I think about that. One is, again, settling on a set of core values that are simple to understand, like we've done, right, with our regs and with that training. That's one sort of macro way I think of thinking about it. But to your point, we've also got to meet employees kind of where they are and what their skill sets are. So I think we are in sort of this movement of experience. And I also think that the equity, the focus on equity and the equity EO have really helped us think about this in a different way. I think at this moment in time, in government, in history, I think we are in the middle of moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach as a way of operating. And I sometimes feel like when you're in the middle of the forest, you don't know where you are in that journey. But I feel that because there are demand signals for what you're talking about, which is meeting different employees with different skill sets where they are, meeting veterans from different backgrounds and different demographics where they are. I think we're in a moment in time where a driver can and should be really kind of away from this sort of blanket approach and really making sure that we can connect with individuals on a more kind of understanding level. And so, for example, women veterans in our space, they have different needs than male veterans. There may be some similarities, and we certainly want to have those similarities, but they may have unique needs as well. And so we want to be able to sort of use human-centered design, use experience to actually create different artifacts, prototypes to meet them where they are. Same principle, in my view, would apply to employees as well. So I mentioned that we did VA's first ever employee experience journey map based on human-centered design. We interviewed over 150 employees, to your point, Bob, from all locations, all demographics, all levels, from, whatever, to senior executive, to, everything in between. And we really wanted to get that macro snapshot to understand at that high level, what are the kind of hallmarks of a journey of an employee at VA? Number one. Number two, what are the pain points? What are the bright spots? And that is sort of a place where we start. We then go sort of dive deeper into the pain points, at least at that macro level, which for VA is onboarding. Not surprisingly, who's had a great experience with a PIV card? I mean, it's hard. This is hard stuff, not to knock our PIV friends and family, but still, there are pain points that are known not only in VA, but across other organizations as well. And so we dive deeper into those particular areas. I think as you go into different pain points and you start correcting them through human-centered design, prototyping, and testing, that's also an opportunity to look maybe in a different slice of data. So demographics, for example, female employees, male employees, transgender employees, right? Let's look at all these different slices of our identities. And we're actually doing some work in that space too. So we can understand the employee by those types of identities, not just by their grade level. So spot on. And again, I will be a broken record. Design thinking and human-centered design to me is the best way to get us to where we want to be in terms of those particular aspirations of harmonizing and giving everybody the best experience we possibly can.
So if I may, could
yes.
Sorry. So this is related to what Kim asked, and I completely hear you about the need to train employees to be empathetic to whatever situation, emotional condition, or whatever the client is facing, and then make sure not only that it's a transaction that's got to be completed, so they can be satisfied with what they're looking for immediately, but also to not be brusque, be polite, be courteous, all that. However, all of that takes time to do. So if you treat a transaction like a transaction and just finish it and then try to move on to the next one, I'm reminded of waiting in the line at a bank teller. I was waiting, and the previous client was chatting away about how her cat got stuck in the tree, and she was very anxious. And this went on for 10 minutes. Well, the employee couldn't just say, I'm busy, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about your cat. And we lost 10 minutes of throughput for that employee. Well, if throughput is measured by how many clients you're processing, and I know that Social Security is very sensitive to developing backlogs of cases not being disposed, then that's a problem. So there's always a trade-off. How do you deal with it? Because if your backlog is growing, people are waiting longer, and that's going to be a cause of negative consumer experience reports. So how do you balance the throughput versus the, which is another way of putting what Kim asked about budget. If I had a massive budget, I could hire 10,000 more employees, but that's not the case to maintain my throughput.
And this is, I think, to your point, and remember I talked about tension earlier, this is one of those classic tensions. So I came from a production-driven environment in my first job at VA. Attorney, I was a line attorney. I had to produce a certain number of cases every single week. Judges had to sign a certain number of cases. So that's absolutely real. And I think about what the driver of production is. There are probably a number of them, but I know in a lot of agencies, a driver of that is accountability because of what our siblings on the Hill want to see in terms of performance, right? So if we all agree that we're going to value operational metrics above all else, you're absolutely right. It's going to be very hard for us to squeeze in experience to make it relevant and valid if we're just looking at those sort of operational production, the transactional productions. Where I see an opportunity, and again, I'm encouraged by seeing the TIPS Act come out, is a slight shift, not to say operational metrics are less important, but to elevate experience again as a co-equal measure of performance. Because if you think about this, if we were kind of held accountable and brought to the Hill because of negative experiences, that would shift, I think, resource allocation, resource management pretty significantly. And so it's really a matter of helping us all tell that story, that experience is a co-equal measure of performance, and we will also be held accountable for that. That said, though, that doesn't sort of solve the problem in terms of the productivity experience tension. What I will say, though, is I talk about, my experience with the veteran, the World War II veteran. Yes, that took time, But the fact of the matter is I was able to actually create a good experience out of a bad sort of transaction with that veteran. We're actually able to do that, at least at my old group, in terms of that one-on-one interaction with veterans. So for example, we have hearings that we hold on these appeals, right? So a veteran is denied at a lower level and they file an appeal, not a happy experience. It usually takes a long time. And it's also, they probably don't feel like they've been validated or heard. What we do is we measure not the sort of the impact of, if they got a denial, but we measure the interaction a veteran has with that judge on the hearing side of the house. And veterans report incredible experiences, 95, 96% positive experiences in that forum. So even though it is something that may not be sort of helping produce more, that is actually a positive measure of our performance as well. And you can create a great experience in that moment. The hearing is going to be held anyway, right? It's great to create a great experience when you're in that moment, you're holding that moment with that veteran when you have to be there anyway. Let's make it a great experience and not miss that opportunity. So, but I take your point.
The import of my question is not just that if you elevate the consumer experience metric, place it more on par with other metrics on productivity, well, you may be stuck, because while you change your culture to deal with improving the consumer experience metric, you may not do it, because improving consumer experience metrics for some consumers may worsen it for others, and the overall metric may not improve.
Yeah.
So it's not, you may elevate the metric in terms of your accountability or not, but it may not actually deliver results, because it's very hard to actually across the board improve that metric. Because paying attention to some customers more means paying less attention to other customers. And so the overall metric may not improve.
Yeah, and I think for us in the early days of VEO, your point and kind of the skepticism there, that's absolutely real. And that's something that we needed to sort of frankly buy some runway and buy some time to prove the concept. And so over the years, I talked about the trust metric increasing by 24%. That doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you invest time, energy, resources, leadership commitments. So to your point, you're absolutely right. It will take a commitment of resources on some level to be able to give that care and feeding to experience. Because VA, again, in my view, had that catalyst back in Phoenix, that was sort of the wake-up call, that was the burning platform. So we were in a position where we were able to sort of make that decision, we, the leadership at the time, to devote and invest resources into this particular office and this mission. And so I think we're lucky that we've been able to actually prove the concept, not just at a macro level, but on a healthcare level, as I mentioned. So Veterans Health Administration has been sort of a partner, with us this whole time in improving the concept, and they've embraced it. And so we've actually been able to sort of build suites of tools, roll it out across the system. And that's a huge reason why our trust scores have increased, so substantially over such a short amount of time. But yeah, there has to be a willingness to talk about resourcing. And if there is no resourcing, you'll have to, reserve, for the boots on the ground, the grassroots folks, to be able to bring that forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Barbara, before I hand it over to Conway for public questions, I'm struck, one of the things Jagadish just said struck me is that in my experience in service areas is that some people want different things. And so the idea that giving one person more time leaves less time for another person, that might be just fine for that other person.
Sure.
Who they want to go use a computer assisted facility because they're really not interested in talking to anybody and they know exactly what they want, versus somebody who needs someone to listen to them carefully. So balancing those needs seems to be the core challenge here.
Yeah, and I think that's where data comes in terms of, again, human-centered design insights, operational data. I mean, if I'm doing a human-centered design sprint on a certain cohort of veterans, let's say a younger population, to your point, Bob, they may say, you know what, I don't want to call a 1-800 number. I want everything kind of self-service. And so to your point, and feeding we need to give to the digital tools is a little bit different. That's an investment, but actually it will probably help us on the contact center side as well, right? And so you're right, it is that trade-off. And going back again to, I don't think there's really one size fits all. I think on some level there are commonalities, but I think the opportunity with experience is to help us divert resources in ways that are going to be useful and productive, meeting different cohorts of our clients, our customers, where they are, and trying to sort of meet their needs, knowing that, you know, resources are always going to be limited, but how do we direct them in the most effective and satisfying way?
Great. Yeah, there are other board questions?
Sure. I just had one further question, if I may, Bob. Barbara, yes. In terms of, you know, when I'm looking at what VA has done, it strikes me as just an immense culture change.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering about, in terms of driving that culture change within the agency, obviously leadership at the top, et cetera, but how big is your office? And did you have, you know, kind of teams spread out across the organization, or was it your office going out and talking to people, or can you talk a little bit about how you approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, so let's go in a time capsule together, can we? We'll go back in time a little bit. So Phoenix happens in April 2014. Secretary Bob McDonnell comes in August 2014. There was a VA-wide, and typically the way VA tackles juicy challenges is through like matrixed integrated project, project teams. So I was on that IPT for the original sort of concept and design of what this office can and should look like. Now, it was the first ever for VA. And so there was a lot of discussion initially with what your questions are, which is, okay, do you create a chief veterans experience officer with an office that is a direct report of the secretary? Do you just create a champion and then they're spread out throughout the organization? You know, what are the other sort of options that we have? A lot of debate on that. And I think where ultimately leadership landed was, again, we've got to elevate experience for this cultural change, to your point, where our office is a direct report of the secretary. We are not buried under multiple layers. Not to say that wouldn't be a viable option, but for us, I think that was the sort of thought. We have a chief veterans experience officer that's a political appointee sitting at the table with other appointees and being a champion for customer experience. We started off with what, by the time I came in July 2016, so it was like a year and a half after the office was initiated, I think we had about 100 people on board. And again, it was interesting though, because the original model was about outreach. And so the original model was about geographic footprint and distribution. So we had in the early model, people that were hired all across the country in different geographical regions to sort of be like, you know, stewards of the experience of those geographic regions. That model, again, sometimes when you're a startup, you got to pressure test, you got to try, and you've got to pivot. That model didn't quite work, in my mind, because, a lot of components of the department do outreach already. So I think it was sort of this, there wasn't necessarily a high demand signal for additional help in that space, which is why we pivoted really to kind of the data tools, technology, and engagement sort of focus. And so today I think we've got about 160 folks on board. But over the years, it's interesting, we've been asked to take on additional efforts. So for example, there's a 24/7 live agent answer hotline. We were asked to take that on. So we're adding more, staff to help staff the volume there. So we have a lot of different things in our portfolio, and it continues to grow, which is incredible to see. Demand signal for support from VEO, particularly in the design space and also the survey space, has increased, over the last few years by like 200%. So people are really kind of getting a taste for it. People are understanding again, and it feels good, right? It feels good to focus on experience. That's very motivating for employees. And so we're asked to scrub in to so many different things now. Whereas before we were trying to sort of evangelize, if you will, the value before the concept was proven through measures of performance and satisfaction. So it's definitely been, not a straight line necessarily in terms of a journey, but our goal is to not necessarily always add, more and more people, but to integrate and to make sure that we can teach people how to do human-centered design, for example, so we can sort of scale that practice, not just in a little baby office relative to VA. I mean, we're a small office comparatively to other offices, but really wanting to sort of scale the practice of human-centered design to empower employees to actually practice that and be able to bring those methodologies to their particular business line.
Great, thank you.
Okay, sure, of course.
Are there other board member questions before we go to our attendees? Okay, Conway.
Hey, so we at the moment do not have any public questions, but I would remind attendees there's a Q&A box at the bottom, and please feel free. I think
I've got more slides too. I mean, I can continue.
You do have more.
Yes, I do. I have tons of slides, but I death by PowerPoint. I don't want to be that person, but you tell
Barbara, we do have some set questions though that we've thought about in advance. So Conway is our conveyor of those. Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, the question is, I think board members have asked a lot about how do you institutionalize this, and Kim's question about, where it's located, how it works. It seems like a lot of it is just getting buy-in iteratively, kind of proving your concept. And I was wondering how you, you described yourself as an analytical and insight organization with a horizontal view. There are other components traditionally in government who also have a horizontal view. Think about budget and performance, traditional research offices, et cetera. Especially when you're now taking over the call center, how do you coordinate with those other offices? I'd be kind of interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. So, when VEO was first established, again, sort of, as a result of this catalyst, I think there was a lot of energy of, expended sort of standing up this office. But what I realized when I came in, it was sort of a planet of excellence that was sort of off on its own. And so one of the things that I think all of us in government understand, at least in VA for sure, standing up something that is separate and apart is really never going to get the traction or the kind of the legs that you need it to. It's all about integration, and integration is so hard. It's so hard, and it takes time because there are productivity requirements, there are budget requirements. It's really, really hard to be able to thread yourselves and your programs throughout. But our approach really has been, highly, highly collaborative. We're here to sort of serve the rest of the department. We have really, really focused on, again, helping tell the story about experience, in particular, human-centered design, bringing our siblings in as part of the process too. So when we started with our Veterans Health Administration siblings in terms of, proving the concept, human-centered design interviews, prototyping, testing, deploying these kind of tangible tools to improve the experience, we brought those partners in. They were part and parcel of the co-design, right? So we really set the intention of not doing this thing separate and apart, but always making the effort to look left, look right, really bring people in and making sure that they became part of any project that we were involved in. And that's really the culture in our office. Not to say that, we all have our own little stovepipes in any organization, but we really do across VA look for spot opportunities to integrate and support across and always want to bring in our partners and not do things in a vacuum and isolation. And I think it's really it's an incredible learning opportunity when, we're out on the road, we're interviewing, veterans, to have those partners who are frontline employees, who are, the SMEs, the experts, to have them ride along and be part of those conversations and part of the development of prototypes and testing tools. It's incredibly powerful because it helps show everybody a different way of thinking and doing and then executing, and being able to be part of something like that is so positively received because it's designed with and around the user, the veteran, is really, really, really an incredible win-win, I think, for everybody.
Great.
Well, great. Well,
go ahead, Bob.
Oh, do you have another question, Conway? I'm sorry.
No, please.
Great. Well, I was going to suggest, Barbara, you get back to those slides and we'll have some more questions later on.
Okay, that sounds great. Awesome. All right, so next slide if we can, Omar. So we talked about our core capabilities and a little bit of our history. This is, that's the what that we talked about. So wanted to talk a little bit about the how and the framework. And again, you know, to continue to go back to human-centered design, really always starting with data and insights about what the customer is telling us. Let's use that as sort of fuel for us to give us direction that we need to go forward with a certain solution. We also sort of really enjoy and like to talk to our industry brothers and sisters, folks who are masters at experience in an industry perspective. So for example, as I mentioned, starting with the Veterans Health Administration, building the patient experience program with them, one of the things we did back in 2017 was to understand, you know what does good experience look like in a healthcare setting? We wanted to speak to leaders in this space in industry. So Mayo Clinic, Barrel Institute, UCLA Medical Center. We actually went out there and we said, hey, can we beg, borrow, steal, and adapt to anything that you all utilize in terms of best practices for experience? Because you're leaders in this space in the private sector. And so that's kind of another best practice, starting with the veteran, but also starting with other industry and nonprofit, other agency experts to really see what we can borrow and adapt and bring into the department. So designing and implementing, that's kind of the next step. As I mentioned, again, really rapid, agile prototyping, really kind of understanding what's working, what's not working soon, not doing sort of a typical waterfall approach where you kind of build something for a year and then throw it over the wall and hope it works, right? So it's a very rapid, iterative process and really making sure that we can get feedback and incorporate it and institute any changes before we sort of pilot and then go live. Responding and improving. So this is where we always want to measure our performance on the back end. We really want to understand, did this actually work? Did this human-centered design stuff work? And really making sure that we have that real-time survey capability on the back end to measure our performance. So next slide. Okay, next slide. So just a quick note on human-centered design, and I always like to give sort of a low-tech example about the power of experience. So one of the things that we've done about 45 or so journey maps, again, hundreds of interviews with veterans across all demographics, ages, location. And one of our first journey maps that we did was, as I mentioned, the outpatient experience journey map. And the interesting thing about that is one of the moments that mattered most to veterans and when we interviewed them was navigation of a VA medical center. Now, the interesting part about that is that I think if we're talking about operational metrics, that would never naturally appear on a medical center director's dashboard, right? The dashboard would talk about surgeries conducted, appointments scheduled. This was sort of like an invisible moment that mattered to veterans and their experience that we found that fell out of this research. So knowing that experience is our North Star, that we wanted to make that experience better, that pain point better, we worked with the Veterans Health Administration to scale a program that had been in existence in some, but not all facilities, that is a very low-tech, simple solution, which is an ambassador program. So when you walk into a VA medical center today, you will see an ambassador wearing a red coat, a branded jacket across the system to greet veterans and help them navigate. Now, these are volunteers. And so to, the questions about budget, this is pretty much a low cost or nominal cost because they're volunteers helping this way. So being kind of creative in terms of the budget question. When we measure our performance on the back end, right, of the improvement of navigation of the VA Medical Center, veterans tell us that it has been measurably improved, and the question with respect to ease of navigation of a medical center, specifically, performance has increased by 4% over the time that we've scaled it across the system. So again, evidence-based. If we agree that we're going to value experience as a co-equal measure of performance, that is a measurable improvement of our performance just by utilizing human-centered design, a very low-tech solution based on volunteers with nominal investment. So I always love sharing that story because it's sort of one of those hidden gems that fell out of the human-centered design research. Next slide, please. So surveys. So remember we talked about the 2 dimensions of data, human-centered design being one, the real-time surveys being another. So we have, again, brought this survey capability across all business lines in the department. So health benefits, memorial services, appeals, and others. And this platform is a best-in-class platform. We have branded it internally. It's called Veteran Signals. And it really allows you to understand, what the experience is on a very granular level, but also at a macro level. So this platform, you can slice and dice data by age, by gender, location, by topic area. There are word clouds, there's data analytics. For all the data folks out there, I mean, this would be like, you'd be gaga for all of the information that is coming in here. And so that's really a platform that's enabled frontline employees to be able to, recover a veteran, service recovery, recover a veteran, make a particular issue right that has not worked. For example, let's say it's a pharmacy prescription refill issue. We can actually connect with that veteran, who's given that feedback and make sure we can make that right. But the other kind of benefit of this platform is you can sort of see across the system too. So it's an integrated way to say, is that a pharmacy prescription refill issue in that one area location? Or is it a system-wide issue that we need to kind of address and look more deeply into? So very rich tool, and also social media scraping and just a whole bunch of great things for the data folks out there who love that type of thing. Next slide. Talk about the tangible tools, right? And how we translate data into tangible tools. I spoke about the Own the Moment training, which we've delivered, really talking about, again, the difference between experience and customer service. I talked about our core values refresh training, that 10-minute micro learning module. We Care leadership rounding is another thing I'd love to just highlight briefly. Again, an insight that fell out of some of our research with best in industry leaders, particularly in healthcare. So when we went out and talked to the UCLA medical centers, the Beryl Institutes, the Mayo Clinics, one of the things they said about how they lead an experience related to, again, something very low tech, very no cost or nominal cost, and that is rounding, right? So their executives would round the floor, not once a year, not once a month, but on a regular basis, talking to employees, talking to customers. Again, this is not a huge fancy investment. It's really just devotion of a certain amount of time to sort of stay connected with your ecosystem. And so we adapted that best practice, that industry best practice, branded it to sort of dovetail with our core values, which we term I-CARE, for integrity, commitment, advocacy, respect, excellence, as I mentioned before, and branded it as We Care rounding. So that is another suite of tools that we've rolled out across the healthcare system to help move the needle, again, on trust, which you see, again, the 24% increase over the last few years. Red Coat Ambassador program I mentioned before, standard phone greeting. I mean, what a simple, a simple fix, right? So veterans, when they're calling a certain location, they may have lots of different 1-800 numbers. They get disoriented in terms of who they're talking to. Having some sort of standard intro phone greeting, very low tech, simple solution, but helps to give that sort of more unified experience. We also have a number of communication artifacts. I mentioned the VA Welcome Kit, which again, shows veterans where VA fits into their lives by their life cycle, not sort of burdening them with, hey, here's VA's org chart, figure out where you need to go. So that's a great artifact. One of our first that we started to develop back in 2015, 2016, and update every year now. Next slide. Technology. I know this group is interested in technology, and I mentioned this before. So we're the stewards of sort of cross-cutting digital and contact center and technology initiatives. Enterprise data management, of course, is the engine behind all of that. Integrating back-end data, it maybe not be the most exciting thing to talk about, but it is a key enabler to give the veteran the ability to update their address in one place. Imagine that. Veterans, we used to have to go to multiple different places to update their address. Now they go into VA's digital front door, va.gov, and they can update it online, and it is propagated across the system. So veterans don't feel the burden of having to update things in lots of different places. Contact center modernization, also, I mentioned that as well. We're kind of the steward of that strategy and really making sure we want to integrate approaches, trainings, things of that nature, CRM software across our system, and then digital modernization, which I mentioned as well, va.gov being our front door, and satisfaction increasing by the great work that we've been able to do based on human-centered design. Next slide. So va.gov, I mentioned this before, and I'm sorry, it looks like with the 508, there's not a visual here. There are a couple of screenshots on the original slide deck, but this again just reiterates the sort of prototyping, the human-centered design methodology we utilized to really redesign the look and feel of that website, with satisfaction increasing for veterans by 20% since launch in 2018. Next slide. Engagement. So this is our fourth of the core capabilities. I may have mentioned we do sponsor 2 federal advisory committees. So really making sure we stay connected with other partners out in the field, out in the community, experts to sort of help us understand what their experiences are. Notably for this one, we have a federal advisory committee, first ever of its kind in VA, that is focused on veterans' families and caregivers and survivors, because that's a huge, huge support network for veterans. And typically they are the ones that interact with VA on behalf of veterans. So we want to make sure that we can understand their experiences and channel their feedback as well. We also have sponsorship, and we support community veteran engagement boards. These are kind of grassroots boards that exist throughout the country in different pockets. They are community led, but we certainly partner with them, again, as a strategic information distribution channel, in particular with certain events. I think about COVID, for example, making sure that they are aware of any updates, and we can sort of host certain events, informational events on hot topics as well. I did mention also the Vet Resources newsletter that we put together. This is a great information distribution channel. It's an e-newsletter, again, low lift in terms of budget financially, and the subscription is not too heavy, and we're able to send out content once a week to 11 million or so subscribers, which is awesome. And then the final sort of component of our engagement is what we call Veterans Experience Action Centers. So we know from a veteran's perspective, they have a hard time navigating VA, and that certainly is in person, digitally, by phone. And one of the other pieces of that is the fact that, hey, I have a health and I have a benefits question. Do I now have to, call one number in the healthcare system and then call another number in the benefits system? What we try to do is we bring together, again, that integration piece, Kim, that I was talking about, and Conway before. We bring together SMEs, subject matter experts from different parts of the department, and host a one-stop shop event. So if a veteran has multiple questions about multiple parts of their VA benefits and services, we help sponsor these events so they can get, one-stop shopping in this one place, which is great. Next slide. So the so what, right? So what? All this stuff sounds great, but so what? And this is really kind of what I always come back to. Again, if we agree that trust should be and is a North Star, is a valuable measure of performance, a co-equal measure of our performance, this is sort of what the art of possible is in terms of building that trust over time. Again, when investments are made and commitments are made to experience and elevating it along with other very important measures of success. We've come a long way in all of these core dimensions, which are our principles of trust, ease, effectiveness, and emotion. And our ultimate goal is aiming for 90% agreement with the statement that I trust VA to fulfill its commitment to veterans. And so 90%, that was set many, many years ago. We want to aim high. We want at least an A, some version of an A, and really want to continue to drive our organization to reach that aspirational goal as well. Next slide. So I can pause, I'll pause there. I can talk more about employee experience, but I can pause there, Bob, if you have any additional thoughts, questions as well.
Well, I'll jump in and then I'll ask other board members again and then public members. One of the things about when I think about veterans, I think of it as being a community.
Yes.
And that people think of themselves as part of the community. And that when there's a community, that means there's people who are in the community and outside the community.
Yeah.
And so as you're talking about trust, I've often myself found that people who have had the experience of being veterans start off with a sense many times that unless you've been a veteran, you've had that experience, you really can't understand. Is that something that you've had to address?
So, I mean, I have not necessarily come across that as a piece of feedback in any of our our research. I think it's a really good point, a really good question, because yeah, that would be a natural question mark. Like, what, you're not a veteran, you didn't necessarily, kind of walk in my shoes. How do you kind of really understand it? But I think it's probably, if I may surmise, I think it's because we never start with thinking that we have the right answer or solution. We always start with asking and speaking with veterans and their families. And I think there's so much weight and power in that, in the sense of Barbara, as a non-veteran, as a shameless patriot, but non-veteran, may have certain ideas about what would be a good way to solve a certain problem, but not having walked in those shoes and not having, a presence in that person's life, maybe my guess would be right, maybe it would be wrong. So let's take the risk out of it. Let's take the question mark out of it. And instead, go directly to the source. And it's really kind of that purity of human-centered design to really understand and not assume that you have the right answers or the right solutions. We could have a hypothesis, but let's make sure we go out and do our research to either validate or to pivot away from that.
All right. Other board members, questions?
Yes, so I have a question about the entire process that you went through since the inception.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, support from leadership, from the secretary down, is very important.
Huge, yep.
But continuity in that support for this initiative and to see it through would depend on, the rate of turnover of leadership. If it's very short, you would get people with different perspectives who may or may not see eye to eye with your vision.
Yeah.
And the other aspect is, were you at any stage during the process, right from the beginning, did you have any doubts as to whether you would meet with the success that you have? Was there periods where you thought maybe this is not going to take off and not get off the ground? And what were the causes of that kind of thinking? And obviously you saw it through because of leadership support and your work, but what were the challenges along the way?
Oh my gosh. I mean, among friends, there were many, there were many. And I appreciate that question, because I think it is easy to sort of see, wow, this incredible journey that VA has been on, and it was a straight line and it was seamless, right? And it was not, to your point. So I can tell you that, and I speak a lot to my siblings across government who are just, they're startups as well, and these are always going to be startup shops. And as anybody who's ever done a startup, whether personally or professionally, there are oftentimes hiccups along the way. And so I will share with you that when I decided to come over to the Veterans Experience Office in July of 2016, a lot of people thought I was absolutely bonkers. They thought I was crazy for doing that. Why? Because there was an election that was going to be around the corner in the fall of 2016. And to your point, who's to say, is this office going to stick around or not? And so I think with that transition in January 2017, there was absolutely not certainty. There was absolutely not certainty about the future of the office. And what I can tell you is, myself, and along with my teammates, we are such staunch believers in this as sort of the right way to do business for the public, as a member of the public, that we were tactfully relentless and really sort of buying ourselves enough time, frankly, to be able to prove the concept through evidence. So I will tell you that the transition, so like 2016, late 2016, probably to, through 2017, the future was very uncertain. We hadn't had enough time to prove the concept and the value, right? The patient experience program that I mentioned that we started to build in 2017, really sort of the flagship proof of concept that we've been able to kind of showcase and demonstrate. And so I think key to your question is, when you have a transition and, at that time, leadership that had come in that, wasn't sure about the value of the office for good, bad, or different reasons, we were able to sort of buy enough time for people to say, okay, well, let's allow them to give it a shot. The concept. And so when I talk to my brothers and sisters and other organizations who are trying to sort of make the case, you almost have to have a perfect constellation of just enough time just enough coalition of the willing around you to kind of help, tell the story. You have to have that passion, that fire in your belly. I'm sure hopefully everybody can tell that I have that, and I try to share that and spread that. But it's almost like a perfect constellation of events had to come together, because that the office was not certain in January 2017. It was not a foregone conclusion. So we had to fight for it. We had to fight for it and prove it, which, as a taxpayer, I get that. You got to prove the value to the dollar, to the veteran, to the customer. I mean, this is all the ecosystem as stewards of taxpayer dollars that we live in. So I understood that. And I'm just so grateful that the theory, the hypothesis in my mind behind using human-centered design and designing with and for the customer, feeding them what they're hungry for rather than guessing what they might be hungry for, the hypothesis that I had and others in this space had actually was able to bear out through evidence-based measures, metrics, and proof, which I think has really allowed us to get more and more runway, as you're suggesting, to be able to continue to build. But I'm very sort of always interested and empathetic to listen to others who are trying to build any sort of shop, whether it's customer experience or anything else, because those early days are not for the faint at heart. Definitely not.
I have a follow-up as well. So
Sure.
Going forward, I mean, you're not going to be there forever. How do you build in succession? How do you plan to kind of perpetuate, and what measures do you take?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So I'm always a believer that no organization rises or falls on a single person. So you got to be able to plan for what you're saying, any transition. And so one of the things, and this might be a good segue actually, and Bob, you tell me, for the cookbook segment. So one of the things that I love about being in government is that it's a very vibrant and complex environment. I think a lot of times when you kind of think about government, it's like, oh, it's this clunky, bureaucratic, unwieldy thing. But it's actually a really fluid environment where you can be very creative in terms of driving certain transformation initiatives. And so the cookbook was really sort of a demonstration of all of the nooks and crannies, big, small, in between, strategic, tactical, operational, everywhere in this space of government where you can take an experience so it lasts beyond you, because I don't want this office in VA to be personality based or personality driven. Yes, I am a passionate, shameless advocate, but I don't want everything to fall apart if I'm gone or if others are gone, right? So the cookbook, and actually, Omar, would you be able to drop down a couple slides and I can walk through that, really showcases all the methodologies we have utilized. A couple more slides down. Here we go. To make sure that experience is sort of hardwired in every aspect of this organization. And so, so let me actually keep scrolling down if you can, Omar. Sorry to keep rolling. So I'll start, if I can, sort of as an extended answer at a very, very high level about how this came about and how this sort of analogy, if you will, or metaphor came about. So I'm a very simple person in a lot of ways. When I communicate something, I want to make sure it's easy to digest. And I say that sort of in jest with cookbook, but sort of not. You want it to be accessible to people so they can really understand it. And so the concept of the cookbook came up because in a lot of conversations that I've had with my brothers and sisters across agencies, I talk about the way VA has done it, but very cognizant that that's a way. It's not the only way. And frankly, the sequencing of how we have done it is very contingent on those opportunities that we spot along the way, right? The perfect constellation of events that happens. That is not defined, sort of set or linear necessarily in every organization in the same way. So we wanted to offer kind of global themes and then again, very tactical, tangible things for our brothers and sisters in government to sort of utilize to sort of bake this in. So it's not personality driven. So it's not, up to one person. So the 3 phases here that we outline in the cookbook, and I would encourage everyone for some light summer reading if you're interested to take a deeper look at this document. But really starting with prepping, and in our VA journey, again, that was a couple of years of really knowing the ecosystem, knowing what's relevant to leadership at the time, to changing leadership, knowing what executive orders are coming down the pike, knowing kind of what legislation is out there, really understanding the ecosystem around you so you can spot those areas of opportunity. And the second piece early on, again, is building that coalition of the willing, like-minded thinkers. They're out there, seek them out, find them. You will be able to do that. For us, it was the Veterans Health Administration. Again, early adopters, like-minded thinkers. I mentioned at the outset also our friends who own the VA strategic plan and our Office of Enterprise Integration. They also were like-minded thinkers. So you will start to see, as I mentioned earlier, the Veterans Journey Map and reference to veterans experience in strategic plan documents from the early years, 2016, 2017. So kind of starting to plant those seeds. Then you kind of identify what are the other pieces that we can sort of pile on? What is the proof of concept we can actually show with evidence-based success metrics on the backside? This was the sort of the patient experience program that was really our flagship to prove the concept. And finally, sequencing and executing, knowing the system to sort of bake it into every sort of angle, nook and cranny and move forward and then repeat again. So we started with Veterans Health Administration. We have moved on to other, in addition to that, we're moving on to bringing on other business lines and partners across the department, particularly in benefits as well, to replicate the process and to continue to scale the success. So if you go to the next slide, Omar, thanks so much. So the next slide talks a little bit about, again, what are those sort of cooking categories? What are the sort of core buckets of things that one should think about to start to hardwire experience in different components of the organizational ecosystem and government? So you have strategy as a kind of a global bucket, using those internal and external levers and drivers to fold CX into the organization. At the top, I mentioned agency priority goals, the president's management agenda, the executive orders. Those are kind of parts of that overarching strategy. How do you hook in to those drivers? So it's administration specific. So what? I'm going to hook into it and show the value and connect the dots for experience. Having leadership buy-in, to your point, again, every secretary has had a commitment to customer experience and has vocalized that, save, with a little blip in the 2017 timeframe. But that's also been key. How do we make sure that the secretary level can understand and see the value of experience and help the organization continue to elevate it and prioritize it? Second sort of key area of how you hardwire it in, right? Operations, how do you fold it into governance? So it's reported out to leadership, so it helps inform strategic thinking and decision-making. Performance metrics, agency priority goals, right? How do we measure our performance and elevate experience so it's equal to other measures? Human resources, there was a comment earlier about that. How do you describe, position descriptions to make sure you've got sort of a more human-centered way of bringing folks on so you can have the best of all worlds, maybe experts and also people who are customer experience oriented. In your acquisitions packages, do you insert human-centered design requirements so you know that you're getting the right product built based on the customer need up front rather than having to rework and redesign? So lots of opportunities just in the basic operations landscape to bake this stuff in so it's not sort of left up to chance. In terms of funding, and again, that's been a very good discussion on that. In the early days of VEO, we were not funded by anything other than sort of contributions from across the organization. And we still have that model today, a reimbursable model. So essentially people pay for our services. So that's one way, of course, that does take money, but it's not a line item of budget that is sitting on top of additional costs as well. We've also leveraged some really interesting resources. If you're in a startup situation, this is a best practice that we utilized in the early days. Instead of hiring on or signing a contract for lots of human-centered design support, we actually leveraged the Presidential Innovation Fellows program, the PIF program, and also partnered with United States Digital Services. So internal to government resources. Some of these folks are short-term, federal employees. So if you don't have a huge budget, you would be able to invest, in the short term to bring these folks on to kind of help you build a model and sort of a scalable CX program. The organization, we talked about that too. Where is it positioned in your organization? Again, in VA, the decision was made to have a VEO office that reports directly to the secretary. In other organizations, that may or may not be the best fit. But again, that's how I think you need to know your ecosystem and know sort of what drives the culture in your organization. Speaking of culture, right? Tying customer experience to your mission, to your core values, integrating it into training, leadership development programs. That's another thing that we're doing. So VA has a leadership, it's called Leadership VA Developmental Program. And we've been partnering with them over the last year or so to teach human-centered design to these emerging leaders and to have human-centered design capstone projects. So again, infiltrating wherever we can to have this way of thinking be sort of embedded in different layers of the department. Incentivizing is also a key component of the strategy, making sure that those who are practicing great customer experience are incentivized, whether it's through bonuses or leadership opportunities, things of that nature. Really a great way to sort of add value and elevate experience so people want to commit to it and practice it. Partnerships is another key way to sustain it, actually to build and sustain it. And those are our siblings across government. Those are private sector partners. Those are also nonprofits, our siblings on the Hill. I mean, this is really kind of coalescing around your larger coalition of the willing and seeing what partnership opportunities there might be across agencies or across organizations. And finally, capabilities, really making sure as an organization, you've clearly defined what you're going to deliver and how you're going to deliver it, including tangible tools. And I think in the early days of VEO, that was sort of an initial disconnect where I think there wasn't a clear message about, okay, you do a journey map and then what? We focus a lot on the then what. So we're not just going to do a journey map in HCD research because it looks nice and it's a pretty map. We actually need to translate that into those tangible suites of tools that then we can roll out and scale across the system, then measure our performance on the back end. Next slide.
Barbara, before you move on to the next slide, can you just tell me what a journey map is?
Oh, sure. Oh my gosh, I apologize. I'm so sorry. That's a good level set. I'm so sorry. A good level set. And again, some of the visuals I know because of 508, you can't see in this slide deck. So a journey map essentially is a visual way to capture what an experience is with a specific interaction. So for example, veteran interacting with VA. And so the macro journey map that we started with, again, back in 2015, was basically a visual aid to showcase the interviews and the insights that we gleaned VA from talking to hundreds of veterans across the country, different ages, branches of services, demographics, synthesizing kind of what those global stages in their lives are from entering the military, through transitioning, through starting a career, through getting an education, to retiring, and to aging. So that is a visual way for us to understand what a veteran's life cycle looks like, and also understand what are those moments from a veteran's perspective that matter most to them, and what are the pain points. The value of understanding the moments that matter most is that we can, and the pain points, is we can dive into those areas to make sure we can allocate resources to fix those particular areas. If it's a bright spot and things are going well, that's important to look at too, but we really want to devote our resources to the things that matter most to veterans. So one particular example for that, and I've talked about this a few times, kind of at a global level, we know that veterans have a very hard time navigating the department once they get out, and transition is a very difficult time. So we want to make sure that we can provide, easier navigation through digital tools, through contact center, Red Coat Ambassador Program I mentioned. There are ways that we can address that. And because that is something that matters to veterans, that's how we orient and direct our resources. And so the journey map, again, is a starting point. It's a way for us to visualize, have that conversation, digest the information from interviews that we have directly with veterans, put it to paper to help us then drill down into specific areas that we can actually start to improve through prototyping, testing tools, and scaling it across the system. It's an industry best practice. And I think if folks are interested, Googling Journey Map or the Veterans Journey Map, you'll be able to see it online and sort of see how we understand veterans from their perspective rather than understanding veterans from our perspective. Does that help?
That's very helpful. I'm going to use this little pause to ask one other question. Is that
absolutely,
in my own experience in advocating for people with disabilities, people who'd been in the military had access to internal advocates. There's a whole office of internal advocacy. And so when people were disgruntled or, were facing barriers that they couldn't overcome, that they would get assistance there. And that office, in my experience, was really overloaded with cases. So I'm wondering how your work has interacted with that dispute resolution process that VA has.
Yeah, so in a number of ways. So I'll kind of focus a little bit on the patient advocate. So as you may know, Veterans Health Administration, again, early adopter, key partner for us, they have at every medical center a patient advocate. And those folks obviously are on the front lines, nose to nose with veterans, really trying to address and sort of, resolve some of those particular experience, oftentimes experience related issues. So of the technology portfolio that I talked about, the kind of enterprise-wide technology, we have made efforts and have an initiative to sort of integrate the customer experience feedback that we get from the surveys with those patient advocates as well on the ground. So they're not sort of a disjointed, disconnected source of feedback, but that it's holistic and sort of seeing these issues in the round. And so we definitely support in that respect. We also, as I mentioned, our Own the Moment training, we really try to teach on the ground across medical centers and also other elements of VA on the principles of experience to help them in that service recovery. Sometimes when veterans are having a very difficult time, really making sure they're dialed into the empathetic component of experience, listening, validating, looking people in the eye. Again, a lot of times very low tech solutions, but just different behaviors that we try to teach in kind of the experience principles realm.
So I think it would be probably best at this point to have you continue with your slides, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect. I'm great with that. You're great with that. Awesome. Okay. So next slide, we talked about the 8 cooking categories. I hope everybody is hungry. And actually, can you go back one? Sorry, Omar, can you go back one slide? Perfect. Okay. Oh, sorry. Forward ones. Yes, 31. There you go. Perfect. So this is a little bit hard to read, but if you kind of are able to dive really, really deep underneath these 8 cooking categories are very tactical, tangible, what we call key ingredients. And again, I've mentioned a number of them: leadership support, agency priority goals, acquisitions language, SCS performance plans, incentivizing leadership programs, trainings. I mean, all very kind of tactical, practical ways that different agencies, our brothers and sisters and other organizations can think about in terms of, hey, I know incentives are really big. An awards program is really big in my agency. Maybe we should stand up an awards program or a recognition program around experience, right? So these are just sort of meant to sort of jog thought and ideas to see what might land specifically for different agency. In the cookbook, you can see, roughly 60 or more what we call these key ingredients that are common across government in the sort of ecosystem of government that agencies can really grab onto and utilize to start building and maturing their CX capabilities. The other thing I'll mention too, and again, light reading, it's at the end of the cookbook, we also thought it was important to include agency-specific recipes. So what you'll see in the back is you'll see VA's recipe. We leveraged probably 50 plus of these ingredients or strategies in different times, these moments in time, again, that were sort of had to be seized at a particular time in the perfect constellation of events. But we've applied roughly 60 of these, or 50 of these 60 ingredients to build our program since 2016. And agencies, again, knowing your ecosystem, you can kind of plug these in to prep, mix, and bake in according to your culture, and making sure that you can sequence and adapt in a certain way is really, really important. And I'm always happy to talk to any of our brothers and sisters across government about VA's journey and how we've done it and some other approaches that might be helpful. Next slide. So this is, again, back to the first slide. So we end where we began, which is our CX journey. And it gives just a little visual in the context of the cookbook phases of prepping, mixing, and baking. And I see ourselves baking, hopefully for years and years and years to come, more and more recipes, more and more good things, and most importantly, more and more incredible outcomes and impacts for veterans and their families and also employees. So excited to be on this journey, excited to sort of share my experience and my CX journey at VA with you all, and certainly will always make myself available now in the future for any additional discussions as well. I'm super passionate about this space, as I'm sure you can tell, and it's just an incredible moment in time for us to all be in together. So back over to you, Bob.
Oh, that's fantastic. Enormous amount of information and experience here. What I'd like to do at this point is to, again, open up questions from both the public and from our staff. And then we can have our board members take a last crack at you and we can wrap up. Okay.
Sounds wonderful.
Conway.
Yes, sure. So we have an interesting question from the public. And maybe we can add a little bit more onto that at the end too. But, so the question is, much of what you have done and are talking about starts with caring and being empathetic. Generally speaking, the population and workforce values, appreciates, and esteems veterans. Unfortunately, the disability community is marginalized and not valued in the same way. Would you imagine that SSA as a whole can make a positive headway on that front? And if so, what sort of places might you start on that? And then just to, you know, SSA administers mainly 3 main programs, in addition to retires, but also the SSI means tested program. And so there's also, you know, a taxpayer piece there too. So kind of interested about, you know, and when you talk about stigma or stress and the psychological costs, what comments you have on that?
Yeah, oh God, that's such a rich question. And just as an aside, so when I was at the Board of Veterans Appeals, I oftentimes would be working with our siblings in SSA for medical records and decisions. I mean, we have a very kind of, I'd say we're probably cousins, you know, we're sort of related in a lot of ways in terms of disability compensation, of course, which is our largest, VA's largest adjudication bucket, much like SSA. So I appreciate so much the question. And I think, to me, again, the answer is always going to be going back to human-centered design, speaking with those who are part of our system, and really understanding how is it that we as public servants in the seats that we sit in bring that level of value and empathy to them. Because I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think there is a stigma, a perception of marginalization. And frankly, I think a lot of veterans experience that similarly as well, particularly if they're filing for compensation benefits and things like that. So I would be very interested in some human-centered design research with your customers to really understand what type of interactions, artifacts, language, you know, messages, what would be helpful for them to feel more elevated and less marginalized, number one. And number two, I would be very interested in the synergies across our systems. I mean, so again, I don't think that is, you know, perspective or stigma is limited to SSA. Of course, you know, we've got certainly, I think, part of those feelings as well, potentially attached to some of our veterans who are filing for disability. So I think there could be some interesting cross-agency discussion and collaboration on that particular topic as well. But what a great opportunity, right? What a great opportunity for us from the inside of government to help change the dialogue, the perception, the feeling of our customers, to make them feel the way we would want to feel, the way we would want our family members to feel, and not marginalized at all. And I think the last thing I'll say too, just, you know, thinking about one of the drivers in our orbit today, which I think is incredible, is the equity EO from the White House. We had a lot of discussions about equity across multiple types of populations. And one of the things that we definitely want to be inclusive of are also individuals with disabilities. So certainly underserved populations is a wide net. And I think, to your point, to the question, individuals with disabilities, that gives us another angle, another look at how we can possibly provide better experiences, more empathetic experiences, meeting those folks where they are based on their experiences historically and maybe how they've felt when they've been treated in a certain way.
So just to jump on that, one more point. I think that to the equity EO, you talked about how there's 2 different types of data. There's the human-centered design, kind of based on qualitative data, and then associated performance measures, quantitative. How do you bridge the 2? And can you disaggregate it, you know, by those demographic and geographic factors? And I'm kind of interested in how you blend that in the context of equity and different characteristics.
Absolutely. So I think they're complementary data sources. I think the real-time survey data gives us some smoke signals potentially, like if something is kind of dipping or dropping, it gives us a very clear sort of like quantitative look at certain things. So for example, we know in VA that female veterans have a lower trust in VA than their male counterparts. We also know that younger veterans have a lower trust than their older generation. So that's a signal from surveys that will allow us then to do what? To dive in deeper through human-centered design to understand what's behind those sentiments. And this is where I kind of go back to operational metrics and like survey measurements will tell you a lot of things, but they will not allow you to dive deeper to understand the root cause of why. This is why I think equity and experience are so tightly married, because experience will allow us to kind of dive into those populations to really understand root cause so we can make those adaptations. And again, some of the solutions can be very low tech, very low cost, but we've got to actually do the work to sort of dive a little bit deeper and uncover what those moments that might be most meaningful, quick, easy fixes to make that experience a lot better. So I think they work hand in hand. And sort of the second or third or fourth or fifth thought I have on that too is once you kind of start to prototype and test a solution, for example, we talked about the Red Coat Ambassador program, you utilize the survey to measure your performance on the impact of that solution. Right. So literally the survey question, because we know a moment that mattered most was navigation of a VA medical center. The survey question is, was it easy to navigate the VA Medical Center? It is not complicated. It's a Likert scale, and we measure that the responses, and having that increase by 4% shows us that that Red Coat Ambassador program is actually helping move the needle on that particular pain point as well. So they're complementary. I don't think you can really have one without the other. I think they work very, very closely together.
So that's an interesting point about that program specifically, the Red Coat program and in-person services. You know, constantly these high impact service providers like the VA and SSA are thinking about the different channels access. So of course, in person, but as you mentioned, the call centers and also va.gov online. And so I'm wondering, you know, if there's any insights that you've learned about about veterans' preferences or experiences by those different channels. I don't know if you could touch on that.
So so this I think goes back to, you know, our conversation a little bit earlier about like a one size fits all vice, you know, different cohorts wanting and needing different things. And of course, as public servants, we need to meet everybody where they are. There is no such thing as a one size fits all. So we do know that there is a general preference for self-service in the digital space. We also know that that preference is stronger with, you probably guessed it, younger generations of veterans. So we need to sort of make sure that in terms of resource investments, we want to make sure we can kind of grow and develop and sort of meet the times and expectations from a digital and self-service capacity, but we also can't leave any veteran behind. So we've got veterans from World War II and older generations who maybe prefer their letters and in person. So it's really a balance and kind of trying to help us understand in terms of those investments, how do we sort of maintain, you know, the needs of every veteran at every age at different locations while also building and sort of anticipating what the demand signal will be based on experience in the future. I happen to think, based on kind of, you know, things that I have heard anecdotally and also human-centered design, I think digital is going to become even more and more and more prominent, even more than it is now. So that will help us plan in terms of investments in the digital space while also maintaining and sustaining, hopefully, you know, the most useful types of letters if people prefer paper letters. And that's kind of the other thing. We need to write the letters anyway, right? If we're going to have to send a letter out, we might as well write it in a user-friendly way, test the language with veterans to make sure it doesn't sound like a foreign language that they can't understand. And so that's the way you kind of try to fold in human-centered design and experience in the process, because again, you're going to send a letter anyway. Let's make sure it's sort of in a plain language, maybe format or style, so people can understand it and digest it more easily.
Absolutely. So I have one final question before I turn it back over to the board. I just want to make sure my colleagues on staff, if they have any questions, to jump in.
Hi, Barbara. This is Diane. I understand what a journey map is. I'd like to know if you could dive in a little bit about how you do a journey map.
Yes.
So, you know, you look at the document, it has all these different points on there. And I think about, you know, the range of individuals that SSA provides service to. How do you capture sufficient information, and how do you know it's sufficient about all these different populations that the agency serves?
Yep, so great question. So a lot of it starts with interviews and sticky notes. I mean, literally. So you're talking, you go out, you have a sort of a select sample, diverse sample of veterans, and that's a whole other journey. You want to make sure that you are talking to veterans from, you know, all ages, you know, gender identities, locations. So there's sort of the research plan that our human-centered design experts and professionals always do. And there's a whole methodology behind it. I've not yet earned a certification on human-centered design, although that's a goal of mine someday. But there is sort of a plan up front in terms of who we're going to talk to, how we're going to get access to these folks to understand a particular journey. Then there's the sort of very deep kind of qualitative interviews. And typically there could be, you know, 60 minutes to, you know, an hour and a half or so. If they need to kind of come back and re-interview, they can do that. But they have a series of questions, of prompts, really just trying to draw out naturally the experiences of a certain particular, you know, journey or interaction with VA. Those sort of data points, there's a note taker, you know, those are captured, and then they're sort of synthesized by these, again, these brilliant human-centered design minds. They're able to sort of digest and synthesize common themes that sort of fall out across interviews and sort of across different kind of question sets. And then they typically, you know, kind of, they whiteboard it and they sticky note it out. They take all the notes that they have, they sort of start to synthesize, put them in sort of buckets, common themes, and then sort of map them, start to visualize and map them along a journey map. So it's a pretty iterative and organic process, and it's about being a translator, honestly. It's about translating common themes from across different veteran groups and really trying to identify, you know, pain points, bright spots, and moments that matter most across those journeys. After the journey map is done, again, it's a beautiful picture, but like people would say, well, what's the so what? What are you going to do with that? You can't just let it sit there. You've got to actually translate those insights into those tangible tools that we talked about, prototype them, test them, go back to veterans and say, hey, we want to create a new letter, let's say, that's going to be easy to understand. It's not going to sound legalese. It's going to be a lot easier to understand. We want to use plain language. We're going to bring the letter to veterans and test and iterate with their feedback. The welcome kit that I talked about, which hopefully you guys are able to sort of access online and take a look at, that was co-designed with veterans. And so the insight that kind of drove us there was from that macro veterans journey map, which is, oh my gosh, navigation of VA is so difficult. Like, it is a massive organization like SSA. Where's my front door? I don't know where to go. That was sort of a solution, if you will, that fell out in response to that pain point of navigation. And so the welcome kit now shows you the veterans journey map, as I said, and where VA plugs in to that veteran's life journey at specific moments in time. So it's a very dynamic, iterative process. There are chronic loopbacks to veterans to test. So we get the initial insights, we put them on a map eventually. We sort of pick a moment that matters or a pain point. We design a prototype. We loop back with veterans to test it. We iterate. And that's the same thing that we did with VA.gov. So it's a very rapid, iterative process, and always incorporating feedback along the way rather than sort of waiting to like the end of some time frame, throwing it over the wall. Hopefully it works, and then trying to scramble to figure out if it doesn't. So it's a really unique process. And you know, as you can probably tell, I am quite a true believer in it because it enables us to divert and sort of direct resources to the right places for veterans rather than just guessing or hypothesizing that we might know where to divert those resources. Does that help, Diane?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Of course,
absolutely.
We have another question from the public, but I do want to get back and try to tie this together with IT modernization as well.
Yes.
Here's another question. I appreciate your recognition that one type of service does not fit all customers, but how do you recognize at the outset which customer needs what? For example, a more personalized service. In the SSA world, for example, even some younger kids are not able to navigate online materials and applications due to language, cognition, or other barriers, either related to their disabilities or not.
Yeah. So what I would want to start with, and this kind of goes back to data, right? And sort of the quantitative data. So I suspect that SSA and many of our brothers and sisters across, agencies have data on, certain metrics or experience, right? Maybe it's not a real-time survey, but you've got some quantitative metrics to show you something is either working or not working that well. So maybe the scores have sort of taken a nosedive in terms of satisfaction with the website, or maybe the 1-800 number, scores have kind of dipped. To me, that's sort of a place to start. It's almost like the little burgeoning smoke signals of where you kind of investigate further. If you have data, and again, this is the other thing I think across government that we're learning, particularly with the equity EO, a lot of parts of VA and a lot of parts of government don't necessarily have tons of slices of demographic data, right? So for example, like LGBTQ plus community, do we have drop-down menus in our systems to capture that, or gender identity? Many systems haven't caught up to that yet. So that could be a challenge also to start in terms of understanding, okay, I see a dip in this data, but can I disaggregate it to understand if there are certain populations that have more negative impact than others. So that's kind of one sort of starting point. The other, of course, again, is if you have a hypothesis about certain of your population in, that is applying for SSA benefits or utilizing SSA, starting with some sort of known, population of, let's say, again, younger applicants are having a harder interaction, difficult experience with SSA. That might be an opportunity to start with a journey map there. So really kind of pulling on known data that you have and really trying to understand, that's a place where you can start to dive a little bit deeper if it signals or points you in a certain direction.
Got it. So, this is the fourth event in the System Speaker Series, and the board had commissioned, an independent expert panel to assess SSA's IT modernization plan. And one of the recommendations that came out was this connection to customer experience. And so I'm hoping here we could kind of tie that back. What lessons could you share with other federal agencies like SSA about how customer experience ties into IT modernization efforts? Specifically, you mentioned at the front end, are your proposals or grants, do they have, the metrics involved? So how should an agency use CX to evaluate its IT modernization efforts? Who should be involved? And I think that would be an interesting discussion to hear more from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think, we think about the ecosystem of IT, and obviously 2 dimensions. There's an external customer facing element of, your website, your claims process. And of course, there's an employee and internal dimension as well. I think because the collective, we are all so dependent on technology. We all know what it feels like to have a new something roll out and have it not be user intuitive and have it be incredibly frustrating, slow us down. I mean, really just having technology get in the way. So I think for me, the way to look at technology is really about being an enabler to providing as much of a seamless experience, both again, from the employee perspective and also from the external customer perspective as possible. And I think the best way to get there, again, is sort of leveraging human-centered design principles, to design your technology actually works for both ends of the user. There are a number of different drivers too. You probably are familiar with the IDEA Act, 21st Century IDEA Act, which really kind of charges IT shops to apply human-centered design to really make sure that we're designing with the customer, the user in mind, rather than what we might hypothesize as a sort of a solid IT system, IT structure. So I think there's a huge opportunity here. I will say though, a lot of times I think IT is sort of an easy kind of splashy focus area to have, right? But it really needs to be an enabler of a great experience rather than sort of the end in and of itself. And that's just my humble opinion. And VA.gov, our journey with VA.gov, I think has really been a great example of that. We had a functioning website, beforehand, but it wasn't user-friendly. I mean, it worked in the sense of it presented information, but it actually was not optimizing or maximizing that presence to the benefit of our users. So redesigning it with them in mind really kind of was able to bring it to that next level. And I think we have a number of drivers in our orbit to point us in that direction as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Barbara.
Of course.
Over to Bob.
Thanks, Conway. I wanted to, before I open it to board members, I just wanted to drill down a little bit, because it seems that in trying to bring the principles that you've been telling us about into a world of IT, which is maybe, not to speak poorly of IT people, but nerds.
I love nerds.
And I love nerds too. I
am a nerd. I'm not an IT nerd, but I am a nerd.
I consider myself a nerd as well. So, but it seems like there's a big translation challenge in order to have the people who are thinking about that, both at the management level and at the code writing level, to understand how what they produce is in the service of customer experience. So do you have any insight on that?
Well, yeah, so definitely have some thoughts on that. So again, I think drawing on sort of experience, like I think we've all been exposed to a new something system that's very clunky and hard to utilize. That sort of leads to downstream sort of weight or demands on the system, whether it's your IT help desk, whether it's your lack of productivity, right? So there are these downstream impacts, particularly in the IT space, when IT is not sort of functioning with the user in mind. And I think that, again, getting back to sort of a CX, a human-centered design orientation, although it's sort of taking time up front to make sure that you're designing things in alignment with the user experience, I do believe that it saves, time, energy, resources on the back end, because it means you're not directing resources into a place that's not going to be intuitive or function for the user. So in the rollout of any new system, to me, or I would start up front with co-designing with the user, being arm in arm with the user to understand the business process in particular, because, the concept of sort of like taking an off-the-shelf product, plugging it in and just going, in theory, I think that's lovely. But I think in reality, there are so many human interactions and business processes that need to be factored in and considered. So I think it's really just about incorporating the human in sort of the upfront project plan, again, through human-centered design, obviously user testing, to make sure that you're going to avoid the pain downstream, frankly, and make those investments upfront. So it's much more accommodating to what the user needs are, and also in terms of the business processes as well.
And I think my last question, which is on a completely different vein, is that in the social service world, the principle of trauma-informed services is very important. And many people with disabilities and other who come into social services another way have had traumatic experiences in their lives that must be addressed. And I'm wondering how that is consistent or ties into the idea of human-centered design.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a perfect example. So at VA and probably SSA as well, we have veterans who have experienced horrible traumas, whether it's military sexual trauma or combat trauma. I mean, right, tons of traumas that are part and parcel of a veteran's life journey and experience. And if we think about, again, the theory, the philosophy of a one-size-fits-all approach, if you take that example of that population just as a way to tell the story that we can't always take a one-size-fits-all approach, I think that's really powerful. Why? Because there are going to be different sort of, experiences that those folks have that other folks have never had, that we need to be sensitive to, or else we run the risk of, frankly, triggering, some sort of bad, reaction or medical emergency. We've got to be very, very conscientious of being able to sort of approach and treat people in certain ways, in customized ways that really respond to their experiences. So one of the things that, again, getting back to some of the work that we're doing in VA right now is understanding women veterans and sort of their journey in healthcare and also in the benefit space. As I said, I mean, they like other, kind of populations, have very unique experiences that other, male counterparts maybe do not. And so that is going to empower us to be able to sort of design a suite of particular tools to address their particular experiences. Some of them may be traumatic experiences, some of them may be non-traumatic, but they are unique. And so again, this draws us back to, I think, the power of customer experience and human-centered design as a best practice in terms of operating and meeting, different populations that we serve where they are.
Thank you. I'd like to ask board members if they have questions.
So I have one question related to one clarifying question and then maybe a substantive one.
Sure.
Thank you, by the way, for adding all this information and giving us this information, because it's very valuable, especially as Social Security launches into its customer experience initiatives. We're still very young at this, and you've been at it for more than a decade, I think.
Yep.
About one of the slides, you showed the different metrics on ease and emotion and effectiveness and so on. There was a fourth category, I forget.
Trust.
But there was trust. I noticed that the effectiveness category had not made any movement, whereas the other categories had.
Yep.
So one question is, were the other categories improving from a point that was especially low? Because I know that in 2014, there was this big negative news fallout from veterans' experiences in getting services from the department.
Yep.
So you might have just increased, emerged from that low at a rapid pace, and then you seem to have plateaued. So in those other measures. So the question is, why do you think you have plateaued? And I know your target is 90%, but you're hovering around 70 or so % in many of those metrics. But the effectiveness, so I believe, at least my instinct tells me that if you improve your effectiveness, that would be a direct way of improving customer experience and customer opinions about your service and trust and so on, all these other measures. But the clarifying question is the effective measure a measure of veterans' opinion of your effectiveness, or is it a true measure of your throughput in terms of, so there could be a distinction, right? You might survey veterans and they might settle at 72 or 74% of your effectiveness measure, but your true effectiveness, the way you measure directly the rate of your throughput and your delivery of services, accuracy, timeliness, and so on, may be much higher or may have changed quite a bit. So is that the right interpretation of that metric? And secondly, if it is actually a true metric of effectiveness, that is, it's your internal metric, then you see where I'm going. I mean, if your effectiveness hasn't increased by much, even if it has not increased in the perception of your effectiveness, how come the other measures improved so much?
Yeah, so great question. So it is a measure of opinion. It is a measure of perception.
Okay.
So literally the questions, and I think they're included in that slide, is I got the services or care I needed. So that's effective. It was easy to get the care or services I needed. That's the ease. I felt like a valued customer. That's the emotional element. And then finally, I trust VA to fulfill its commitment to veterans. So those are the statements that we ask veterans their opinion on. So these measures have literally nothing to do with anything else except for the experience and sort of the personal perception that veterans are sharing with us that they have. I think really interesting point, because I would naturally think if we're seeing, a 24% increase in trust, my gosh, everything else must be going up, that much as well. On this particular survey, because it's at an aggregate macro level, so we actually send out surveys again for the data scientists, super smart folks doing the slicing and dicing in terms of sending these surveys out, but we actually don't tie it to a specific VA service, because a veteran could have multiple VA services in any given time frame. So it's literally just, hey, we know that you interacted with VA on some level in the last 30 days or the last 2 weeks. What was your, based on that experience, please answer the following 4 questions. And so we don't know from this survey specifically why there would be a lower perception of or a lower score in effectiveness. What we can tell, though, of the other surveys that we have live, which drill into those specific business lines, for example, outpatient services, we would be able to see a signal there. Let's see, is the effectiveness in outpatient really, is that lower as well, or is that high? And if it's high, maybe we need to look at other business lines that might be impacting that perception of effectiveness. I can tell you that because we're a relatively new shop, we do not have surveys live for every single business line across VA at this point. We do have, a number of surveys. I think now we've got probably like 85 surveys that are live. A lot of them, most of them are in healthcare. But let's say, for example, we don't have a survey live in compensation for benefits at this point. So there's a little bit of a blind spot that we have, at least in our program. The experiences are measured in their platforms, but we don't have that integrated in our system at this point. So I would be very curious to know, and at a deeper level, why effectiveness has not grown at such an exponential rate. And I think we would be able to discern that the more and more business line specific surveys that go live, we'd be able to hypothesize a little bit more.
And then the question about why do you think you've plateaued?
So, I mean, I think to your point, when you kind of are at a level that is, not an A, it's easier to accelerate to get to a higher level. But we've actually been pretty successful year over year. I think the average increase has been like 3% or so each year. So I think, we're still growing. And what I would say, and I've said this before, we focus on healthcare initially for a variety of reasons. It's where veterans have the most, nose-to-nose interaction with VA. I mean, obviously we have this coalition of the willing and VHA amazing. We are now turning our attention to build the same type of proof of concept in the benefits space. And so my hypothesis is, once we start to sort of crack the nut on benefits experience with our friends across VA, I think that the trust measure is going to start to increase, and you're going to get into like the early to mid 80s. And the reason I say that is because benefits is really a front door, much like SSA, that's a front door for a lot of veterans. If you are kind of entering, and let's say you get a denial and you got this piece of paper, it's a letter and you can't even read it, you don't understand it, that's going to set you up for having a very negative experience. And so I think if we're able to help out in sort of elevate experience in the transition space between DoD and VA, and also particularly in the claim space, I think we're going to start to see that needle move a bit more. And that takes time. To your point earlier, that takes time, it takes commitment, it takes investment in energy and resources. And this is kind of one of the super opportunity areas that I see that our office can assist the department to ultimately serve veterans better and give a better experience, even though it potentially is a very kind of transactional experience. Again, much like with SSA processing, I mean, it can be a transaction of like, okay, somebody's looking at the paperwork and the, processing the claims, application. But I still would challenge us, and I think this is an ultimate leadership and public servant challenge, notwithstanding the transactional aspect of that type of work, which is very important. Can't we, shouldn't we, must we also provide a good experience along with that? So the people that we serve do not just feel like they're being, pushed on a piece of paper in a transaction. How might we make them feel valued in that interaction, even if they don't necessarily get the outcome or the decision that they were hoping for?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kim or Nancy?
I have a question. This has been extremely thought-provoking, so thank you so much for this. As I've been thinking about it, as you've been talking, government-wide, every agency has some interaction with the public. It obviously varies. There are the ones like the VA and Social Security Administration that are providing benefits. There are regulatory agencies, and they have a different, relationship and different set of, often more corporate and stuff like that, IRS. But at the same time, there's also presumably a desire that everyone have a good customer experience, and let everybody feel like they're being treated fairly and that they're getting efficient service and so forth. I guess my question is, you've talked a lot about siblings across the agencies. Are there sort of formal organizational structures where all of you, because I assume there are best practices in every agency where you're able to, I guess, and different agencies are further along than others, but if you could talk a little bit about that, because I take it this is now something that's become an issue government-wide. And of course, it's important for state governments and local governments too.
Yep.
It's public service-wide.
So
general thoughts would be.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think by this time, guys, we've spent 2 hours. I always have a lot of thoughts, lots of thoughts. Hopefully they're useful. So one of the things that has been amazing for me, and so let me kind of back up. So people sometimes ask me, what do you wish you knew back in 2016 that you know now that you didn't know then in terms of stepping into this space? And the one thing I always say is, I wish I had known that I have brothers and sisters inside and outside of government who are drenched in this space, who are going through the same journey, and I wish I knew they existed. So fast forward to 2018, when the president's management agenda, you know, every administration has PMA agenda items, designated VA, as I said earlier, as a co-lead with OMB on this cross-agency CAP goal to improve customer experience with federal services. The infrastructure of that PMA CAP goal enabled us, VA and OMB, to connect with all of our brothers and sisters across multiple agencies, including IRS, SSA, you know, through and through. And so that's sort of, that infrastructure has been in place for a number of years. I still, every single Tuesday, I meet with our CAP goal siblings, and that team, I mean, I've worked with them, you know, literally talked to them and worked with them every week since 2018. So that is, it's relationship driven at this point, because there's no formal requirement. There's not a PMA right now yet with the new administration. Hopefully customer experience and employee experience will be a priority. But to your point, having some sort of catalyst like a PMA CAP goal to bring us all together to create that infrastructure has been incredibly invaluable. You probably are aware too, that as part of that CAP goal initiative back in 2018, OMB crafted the first ever requirement in the OMB A11 directive, or circular. If you're not familiar with it, I would highly encourage you to read probably just chapter 280, which is the first ever that requires agencies to report on customer experience as a key measure of their performance. So the A11 is like a 1,000-page document to teach us all how to formulate our budgets, but that one chapter of 280, take a look at it, because it really is now a requirement for agencies to report quarterly publicly on customer experience measures across multiple domains, including trust and ease, effectiveness, and emotion. And so having that infrastructure, having the framework, having the weight, and frankly, the authority of the A11 and OMB has been really a great, I would say, hook for all of us in this space to sort of gravitate towards. One thing that you'll see if you read the TIPS Act, which I think is really fascinating, is it does sort of establish a more permanent capability, a centralized capacity housed in OMB. It sort of sets a chief customer experience officer of the United States. So it really puts a stake in the ground structurally, to your point, of having sort of a steward of experience to look across agencies, and also to have OMB have a centralized capacity to help build, you know, this and sustain, frankly, this community, which right now, again, is relationship driven. I mean, frankly, everything that works well to me is relationship driven, but there is no infrastructure formally in place right now, to your point. But I think there are such strong relationships and bonds. And, you know, the cookbook, again, is a reference that I speak about a lot of times with our siblings across agencies as a tool. And we wrote it to be a concrete, tangible tool for folks to use. The other thing I'll mention too is that VA, because we're a tiny little office in VEO, we are building VA's Customer Experience Institute. This will be a learning sort of, part of our organization where we will teach human-centered design practices and methodologies. So we can, again, scale that across in a much more effective way, because we know that we're not going to get, 1,000 people to hire. We're not going to be able to bring people on to embed in every nook and cranny across a 400,000 person organization. So we're doing this to sort of scale, to teach, train the trainer, and be able to bring human-centered design practices, methodologies, techniques across the entire department through this institute. My goal, and I will share this with you all, is to open those teachings and those courses to our brothers and sisters across agencies, because for me, it's all about sharing everything that we know, anything that I've experienced. If I can share that with my brothers and sisters in this space across agencies, I want to do it, you know, any way I possibly can. So the ultimate goal will be to share some of that curriculum once we have it developed and built. And frankly, what an opportunity to work across agencies. I mean, I'm sure there are opportunities between VA and SSA. We have a Venn diagram of overlap, right? Where we have veterans who are involved in SSA and VA. God, that is a gold mine of opportunity to provide a more holistic and seamless experience for them across both of our agencies. So I love that type of creative problem solving in space. And I love this kind of cross-agency thinking, because our customers aren't trying to sort of think about, well, what's a VA lane? What's an SSA lane? Let's make it easy for them. And there must be opportunities, again, in that Venn diagram overlap space between our organizations. So excited for steps in future.
And you're exactly right. I mean, I like to describe Social Security as a fundamental veterans benefit.
Absolutely.
Injured in the military, yep. they get disability benefits. Yep. Families get survivor benefits and so
yes.
forth.
Yeah, we are cousins. We're close. We are. We definitely are.
More like siblings than cousins.
Siblings. I like it. I like it. Even better. Thank you, Nancy.
And that's a fantastic lead into our wrap up, which is to thank Barbara again for this extremely rich presentation of immensely important information. And as you know, you're participating in our system speakers series, and the Social Security Advisory Board exists in order to bring this type of information together to provide advice throughout government and the public about how Social Security can better assure economic security for every single American. And this is a program and world that touches all of us.
Yep. And
so sharing this information is incredibly important. We want to thank you very much for being with us today. Before you go, I just want to ask board members if they could stick around a little bit after we close up. And I think with that, we're done.
It's been a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you so much, Bob. And thank you, Conway and team, for getting me teed up here through Zoom. It's been a pleasure to see you all, meet you all. I am available as a resource, as a reference anytime. So I think Bob and Conway and team have my email address. Please feel free to reach out anytime. I'd be happy to share more.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Barbara. Bye, guys. Thank you so much. See ya.
Bye. Thank you, everyone who's signed